So let's start with disco uh, today. Um, the 1970s was a decade of extraordinary inflation, high unemployment, high inflation. This was known as stagflation. For many people, this was a tough decade. It was also a decade of the sort of collapse of major cities, of large cities, the deindustrialization of the North, as manufacturers began to move their plants to the South, where the South didn't offer workers union rights. So these large corporations began to migrate to the South, where they could avoid union memberships. And then they only hired people who didn't belong to unions. And this created this sort of unsettling of working class political identities. At the same time, disco became the most popular pop cultural touchstone of the late 1970s. The music, disco, became so popular that radio stations began to change their formats to all disco formats. Derived from the clubs, the subculture of Latino and African American bars, and gay bars. And this became, to many people, a kind of flashpoint where white, working class, middle class men could see in pop culture a loss of their own identity. And many of these white, working class, middle class men began to rebel against disco. Disco required men to worry about fashion, to learn how to dance. Because if you went to a disco, which everybody did, even if you didn't go to a disco, you probably went to a roller disco. And women expected you to dance. And in a time at which African American, Chicano, Asian American, gay liberation, women's liberation movements were part of the culture, white middle class and working class men began to see disco as the kind of culmination of their loss of power. This event in Kaminsky Park in Chicago called Disco Demolition Night. And this is where people were supposed to come and bring their disco records and blow them up as a sign of their hatred of disco. But when people did come to Kaminsky Park to blow up their records, they didn't all just bring disco records. They brought the records or the records of artists who were African American or Latino, and not disco. And the people who went were white people, and a riot started. Is that it symbolized a sort of like moment at which the white Christian working middle class men began to fight back against the forces of change that had held their privilege in place. And so the 1980 election was the election of anti-disco, of the hatred of disco. And so many people, even if they might not have considered themselves to be evangelical fundamentalists, found themselves aligned with the moral majority of Jerry Falwell and Phyllis Schlafly, who opposed those very same things. They said, well, the progressives are stopping us, so we need to start a conservative movement based in religious principles that will coalesce voters around their religious faith. And this became the moral majority. And the moral majority backed a candidate, and that candidate was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan assumed their their policies. Their policies were anti-gay, anti-women's liberation, specifically the overturning of Roe v. Wade. They wanted an end to government aid for poor people. They wanted that housed in the church. They wanted people to have to come to churches in order to get aid. They thought that the government being in the business of providing aid to people was lowering church participation. They made welfare a racial issue. They essentially marked welfare as if only black people or minorities or people who were doing something wrong were on welfare. Conservatives retook the mantle of Hoover economics, supply side economics, what is commonly referred to as trickle down economics. And so part of that process was to dismantle the union protections, the protections of workers that were put into place by the progressives under the New Deal. They're attempting to undo the Great Society, and they're attempting to undo the New Deal. The Reagan administration attempts to take people back to the time when the government helped businesses at the expense of workers, and the very sort of first attack by him was against the Air Traffic Controllers Union, or PATCO. Almost immediately upon entering office, he got into a fight with the Air Traffic Controllers Union, who tried to go on strike, and when they did, he fired them all. And when he fired all of the air traffic controllers, he signaled to other industries that this government would do nothing to protect workers. And so over the course of the Reagan and Bush administration, throughout the 80s, businesses began to cut out their union negotiations and to end unions in their factories and in their plants. And this effect of connecting white working class workers even closer to conservatism and republicanism, because conservatives kept telling and keep telling white working that the government is too focused on taking queer community or taking care of women, and now all those advantages are there, and you should be. And we can see how the Reagan administration was attempting to use this when we look at the HIV crisis. The Reagan administration was unconcerned with the crisis because it was affecting a very small population, to their mind. And it was affecting a population that nobody cared about. To help the queer community would have been an attack on the moral majority and Jerry Falwell, who were claiming that HIV and AIDS were God's punishment not only to gay people, but to America for allowing gay people to exist without punishment. So the policies of the Reagan administration and their ignoring of HIV was essentially signaling to white working class men, or men generally, that the men were in charge in the Reagan administration. And they were taking care of all of those freeloaders, all of those people who were on welfare and food stamps, government assistance, who are getting help from the government. All of those people are being cut off for your benefit. And that has been the fight between progressives and conservatives for the last 100 years. Who gets helped? Who's involved? Who will, in the end, can things be equal? Can we equalize the system, or do we need to preserve that system for particular people? And that is the ultimate end of the long century of progressivism into what is essentially an era of conservatism.